The eviction notice trembled in my hands, the red final notice stamp blurring through my tears. 3 days. That's all I had left before everything I'd worked for would be thrown onto the street. I could still hear Mr. Hartley's cold voice echoing in the hallway. "I don't care about your sob stories, Miss Chen. Money talks, excuses walk." But what he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the dusty photo album hidden in my closet held a secret that would change everything. A secret about my grandfather that even I had only just discovered. The morning it all started, I was sitting on my threadbare couch, surrounded by past due bills and rejection letters from job applications. 23 years old, and I felt like I'd already failed at life. The small studio apartment that had been my sanctuary for the past 2 years was about to be ripped away from me, just like everything else good in my life had been. If you've ever felt like the world was against you, like no matter how hard you try, you just can't catch a break, then you'll understand what happens next in my story. Sometimes the biggest transformations come from the darkest moments. Stay with me, because what I discovered about my family's past didn't just save my apartment. It revealed a truth that had been buried for decades. My name is Lily Chen, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. The disappointment of the Chen family, the one who couldn't live up to her older sister's perfect standards, the art school dropout who was too stubborn to admit defeat. My sister Victoria was everything I wasn't. Successful lawyer, married to an investment banker, living in a penthouse apartment that cost more per month than I made in a year. At every family gathering, she made sure to remind me of our differences. "Still playing with your paints, Lily?" she'd asked at our last family dinner, her voice dripping with condescension. "Mom and Dad spent so much on your education, and you just threw it all away. At least I made something of myself." Our parents, immigrants who had worked themselves to the bone to give us opportunities, would sit silently during these exchanges. My mother would occasionally pat my hand under the table, but she never defended me. Not anymore. Not since I'd dropped out of law school to pursue art. "Your sister is just worried about you," my mother would say later, always in private, always in whispered Mandarin. "She wants you to have stability." Stability. That word haunted me. It was the reason I'd spent 3 miserable years in law school before finally admitting to myself that I was dying inside. It was the reason my father barely spoke to me anymore, disappointed that his youngest daughter had chosen passion over prosperity. The truth was, I'd been struggling long before the eviction notice arrived. After leaving school, I'd taken whatever jobs I could find. Waiting tables, stocking shelves, anything to pay for my tiny apartment and art supplies. I sold paintings at local markets on weekends, but original art from an unknown artist didn't exactly fly off the tables. Most months, I barely scraped by. This month, I hadn't scraped by at all. My landlord, Richard Hartley, was everything you'd expect from someone who owned half the apartment buildings in the city's art district. Expensive suits, calculated smile, and eyes that saw tenants as nothing more than revenue streams. He'd inherited the buildings from his father and had systematically raised rents across the neighborhood, forcing out artists, musicians, and anyone else who couldn't afford his new market rates. "Your grandfather would be ashamed," my father had said the last time we spoke, 3 weeks ago. "He came to this country with nothing and built a life through hard work and sacrifice. And you throw away every opportunity." I'd hung up on him that day, tired of being compared to a man I'd never even met. My grandfather, Chen Wei-lin, had died when my father was just 15. All I knew about him were the stories, how he'd arrived in San Francisco in the 1940s, worked in restaurants, saved every penny, and somehow managed to send my father to college. The American dream personified, and the standard I could never meet. But even those stories were vague, filled with gaps my father either didn't know or wouldn't talk about. There were no photos of my grandfather in our house growing up, just one formal portrait that my grandmother had kept until she passed when I was 10. My father had inherited a few of his things, some old documents, a watch, a leather-bound journal written entirely in Chinese that he'd never bothered to translate. The morning the eviction notice arrived, I'd already been awake for hours, painting by the weak light filtering through my single window. It was how I dealt with stress, losing myself in colors and textures, creating worlds where things made sense, where beauty mattered more than bank accounts. The knock on my door had been sharp, official. Mr. Hartley stood there himself, which was unusual. He typically sent his property manager to deal with tenants, but he seemed to take special pleasure in delivering bad news to me personally. "Miss Chen," he'd said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I assume you know why I'm here?" I'd tried to explain, tried to negotiate. I told him about the commission I was waiting on, how I just needed another week, maybe 2. But he'd just smiled that cold smile and handed me the envelope. 3 days, he'd said. After that, the sheriff will escort you out. I'd suggest you start packing. After he left, I'd sat on my floor for hours, unable to move, unable to think. I couldn't call my parents. They'd just say it was what I deserved for my choices. I couldn't call Victoria. She'd offer to pay, but it would come with conditions, with years of "I told you so" and obligations I couldn't bear. Instead, I did what I always did when I felt lost. I painted. I painted my fear, my anger, my desperation. I painted until my hands cramped and my eyes burned. And when I finally stopped, when the sun was setting and my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten all day, I noticed something I'd never seen before. In my closet, behind a stack of canvases, was a box I didn't recognize. It must have been there when I moved in. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, and I'd never fully cleaned out the closet. But something about it called to me now. Maybe it was just the need for distraction, or maybe it was something more. The box was old, covered in dust and held shut with twine that fell apart at my touch. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all black and white, all from what looked like the 1940s and 50s. But it wasn't the age of the photos that made my heart stop. It was the faces in them. There, clear as day, was my grandfather. I recognized him from the one portrait I'd seen, though he was younger in these photos, smiling in a way I'd never seen in the formal picture. But it wasn't just him. The photos showed him with other people, important-looking people, at what appeared to be business meetings, grand openings, celebrations. One photo in particular caught my attention. It showed my grandfather shaking hands with a man in front of a building, both of them holding what was clearly a deed or contract. The building looked familiar, though I couldn't quite place it. On the back of the photo, someone had written in faded ink, "Waylin Chen and Thomas Hartley, partnership established 1952. Thomas Hartley. The name hit me like a physical blow. That was Richard Hartley's grandfather. My hands shook as I went through more photos, more documents that had somehow been left behind in this apartment. There were contracts, letters, legal documents, all suggesting that my grandfather hadn't just been a restaurant worker scraping by. He'd been a businessman, a property investor, and apparently a partner with the Hartley family. But none of this made sense. My father had never mentioned any of this. As far as I knew, my grandfather had died poor, leaving my grandmother with barely enough to survive. How could he have been involved in property investments? And why was all of this hidden in my apartment? I spent the entire night going through the documents, using my phone to translate the Chinese portions, piecing together a story that seemed impossible. According to what I was reading, my grandfather and Thomas Hartley had been equal partners in purchasing several buildings in what was now the Art District. They'd bought them when the area was considered undesirable, planning to develop them together. But then, in 1955, my grandfather had suddenly disappeared from all the documents. Thomas Hartley became the sole owner of all the properties, and my grandfather's name was never mentioned again. The last document I found was a letter from my grandfather to Thomas, written in broken English. "Thomas, I trust you to do right thing. My family need me back in China. Emergency. Please hold my share until I return. You are honorable man. I trust you." He never returned. According to my father, my grandfather had gone back to China in 1955 to help sick relatives and had been trapped there when political tensions made it impossible to return. He'd spent years trying to get back to America, finally succeeding in 1965, only to die shortly after from illness contracted during his time in China. But if these documents were real, if this partnership had existed, then my grandfather should have owned half of these buildings, buildings that were now worth millions, buildings that included the one I was about to be evicted from. I didn't sleep that night. As dawn broke, I carefully photographed every document, every photo, every piece of evidence I'd found. Then I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I called my sister Victoria. "Lily?" She answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed. "It's 6 a.m. What's wrong now?" I swallowed my pride. "Victoria, I need your help, your legal help." There was a pause. "If this is about money, it's not. It's about grandfather. I found something, and I need to know if it's real, if it means what I think it means." Something in my voice must have convinced her because she sighed and said, "Send me what you have. I'll look at it." I sent her everything and waited. An hour later, my phone rang. "Lily." Victoria's voice was different, shocked. "Where did you find this?" "In my apartment, hidden in the closet." "Victoria, is it real?" I need to verify some things, but if these documents are authentic, then... Lily, do you understand what this means? Grandfather owned half of those buildings. We should have inherited them. The Hartleys have been collecting rent on our family's property for decades. My mind reeled. But how is that possible? Wouldn't someone have known? Not if Thomas Hartley never filed the partnership documents properly. Not if he claimed grandfather abandoned the investment. Back then, a Chinese immigrant's word against an established businessman, and with grandfather trapped in China, unable to fight it. She trailed off. "Lily, I need the originals. Can you bring them to my office?" "I can't leave," I said, my voice small. "Mr. Hartley, Richard Hartley, is evicting me. If I leave, he might change the locks." There was a long silence. Then Victoria said something I never expected. "He's evicting you from your own building. Don't move. Don't pack anything. I'm coming over." Victoria arrived 2 hours later, and for the first time in years, she hugged me when I opened the door. Behind her was an older man in an expensive suit who she introduced as David Kim, a senior partner at her firm who specialized in property law and historical claims. They spent hours examining the documents, making calls, verifying details. David pulled up historical records on his laptop, cross-referencing dates and names. With each discovery, their excitement grew. "This is incredible," David said. "The partnership agreement is ironclad, and look here." He pointed to a document on his screen. Thomas Hartley filed ownership papers in 1956, claiming sole ownership due to abandonment. But according to the partnership agreement, there's a clause about extended absence due to family emergency. He violated his own contract. "But it's been so long," I said. "Isn't there a statute of limitations?" David smiled. "Not for fraud, and not when the rightful heirs had no knowledge of the asset. The clock doesn't start ticking until discovery." Victoria was already on her phone, calling someone at the courthouse. "I need property records for the Hartley Building Group, specifically the buildings on Maple Street, purchased between 1950 and 1955. As she talked, David explained what would happen next. "We'll need to file an immediate injunction to stop your eviction. Then we'll begin the process of challenging the ownership of these buildings. It won't be easy. The Hartleys have money and lawyers, but with this evidence, they've been collecting rent that should have been ours," Victoria said, hanging up her phone. "Lily, do you have any idea how much these buildings are worth now?" I shook my head, overwhelmed. "Millions, tens of millions, and half of it should have been ours, should have been grandfather's legacy to us." The next few hours passed in a blur. Victoria and David prepared legal documents while I sat in shock, trying to process what was happening. My grandfather hadn't been just a struggling immigrant. He'd been a visionary, investing in property when no one else saw its value, and he'd been betrayed by someone he trusted. At exactly noon, 3 days after receiving my eviction notice, there was a knock at my door. I expected to see the sheriff, but instead, Richard Hartley stood there with 2 men I assumed were his lawyers. "Miss Chen," he said, his cold smile in place, "I trust you're ready to vacate." Actually, Victoria stepped forward. "My client will not be vacating. In fact, we need to discuss your family's illegal occupation of my client's property." The smile slipped from Hartley's face. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "Victoria Chen, attorney at law. Lily Chen's legal representation. And more importantly, the granddaughter of Chen Wei-lin, your grandfather's business partner." "That's absurd. My grandfather had no partners." David stepped forward, holding a folder. "We have documentation that says otherwise. A partnership agreement from 1952, signed by both Thomas Hartley and Chen Wei-lin. 50-50 ownership of 15 buildings in this district, including this one." Hartley's face had gone pale. That's not possible. Those buildings have been in my family for 70 years. "Illegally," Victoria said calmly. "Your grandfather committed fraud when he claimed sole ownership in 1956. Chen Wei-lin's absence due to family emergency was covered under their partnership agreement. The buildings should have been held in trust." "This is ridiculous," one of Hartley's lawyers sputtered. "Even if this documentation is real, which I doubt, it's been far too long." "Fraud has no statute of limitations," David interrupted, "and the rightful heirs have only just discovered the theft. We'll be filing our claim this afternoon." Hartley's face had gone from pale to red. "You can't prove anything. My grandfather built this empire." "With my grandfather's money and vision," I said, finding my voice for the first time. Everyone turned to look at me. "I've spent my whole life being told I was a disappointment, that I didn't live up to my grandfather's legacy. But his legacy wasn't just hard work, it was vision, seeing potential where others didn't, just like I try to do with my art." I picked up one of the photographs, the one of our grandfathers shaking hands. "They were friends once, partners. Your grandfather betrayed that trust." Hartley snatched the photo from my hand, staring at it. I saw the moment he recognized it, the moment he realized we weren't bluffing. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "It was hidden in this apartment," I said. "The previous tenant left it behind. Or maybe it was meant to be found. Maybe my grandfather's spirit knew that one day justice would come." "That's superstitious nonsense," Hartley spat, but his hands were shaking. Victoria stepped forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to cancel the eviction immediately. Then we're going to sit down and discuss how to resolve this matter. You can either work with us to reach a fair settlement, or we can let the courts decide. But I should warn you, the media loves a good David and Goliath story. Immigrant's legacy stolen by trusted partner would make quite a headline." Hartley's lawyers were whispering urgently to him. Finally, one of them said, "We need time to review these claims." "You have 48 hours, David said. "In the meantime, any attempt to evict Miss Chen or harass her in any way will be met with immediate legal action." Hartley looked like he wanted to say more, but his lawyers were already pulling him toward the door. He turned back once, his eyes meeting mine. "This isn't over," he said. "No," I agreed, "it's just beginning." After they left, I collapsed onto my couch, the adrenaline finally wearing off. Victoria sat next to me, and for the first time in years, we were just sisters. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for all of it. The way I've treated you, the things I've said. I thought I was protecting you, pushing you to be practical, but you were right to follow your passion. You were just doing what you thought was best," I said, though her words helped heal something in me I hadn't realized was broken. "No, I was being cruel. I was jealous, actually. You had the courage to leave law school, to pursue what you loved. I never did. I'm good at my job, but I don't love it. Not the way you love your art." We sat in silence for a moment before she continued. "Grandfather would be proud of you, you know. You're the one who found this, who's fighting for his legacy. Not me with my law degree and fancy office. You." That night I called my parents. My father answered, and when I told him what I'd discovered, there was a long silence. "That's impossible," he finally said. but his voice was uncertain. "Ba, did grandfather ever mention property investments? Business partnerships?" He sometimes said things. When he was dying, he talked about buildings, about something he'd lost. We thought it was the fever talking. "It wasn't," I said gently. "He was trying to tell you about his legacy, the real one." I heard my father start to cry, something I'd never heard before. "We struggled so much after he died. My mother worked 3 jobs. If this is true, we're going to make it right, Ba. Victoria and I, together." The next 48 hours were tense. Victoria and David worked around the clock, researching, preparing. I tried to paint but couldn't focus. Instead, I found myself going through the photos again and again, studying my grandfather's face, seeing myself in his eyes, his determination. Finally, Hartley's lawyers contacted us. They wanted to meet. The meeting was held at Victoria's law firm in an intimidating conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard Hartley was there with a team of lawyers, looking older than he had just 2 days before. "We've reviewed the documents," his lead attorney said. "While we don't admit to any wrongdoing on the part of the Hartley family, we're willing to discuss a settlement to avoid lengthy litigation." "What kind of settlement?" David asked. They pushed a paper across the table. The number on it was substantial, more money than I'd ever dreamed of. But Victoria didn't even blink. "This is insulting," she said. "You're offering to buy us off for a fraction of what those buildings are worth, not to mention 70 years of rental income that should have gone to our family." "Be reasonable," Hartley said, speaking for the first time. "You can't expect—" "I expect justice," I interrupted, surprising everyone, including myself. "Your family stole from mine. My grandmother died poor because of your grandfather's betrayal. My father grew up thinking his father was a failure. So no, we won't be reasonable. We'll be right." The negotiations went on for hours, days, actually. Back and forth, offers and counteroffers. The Hartleys tried everything: intimidation, appeals to sentiment, even attempting to question the authenticity of the documents. But Victoria and David had done their homework. Every challenge was met with evidence, every threat with calm determination. During one break, I overheard Hartley on the phone with someone, his voice angry. "I don't care what grandfather's journal says. Yes, I know he mentioned the partnership. That doesn't mean—" "Fine, fine. I'll consider it." When he came back, his entire demeanor had changed. He looked defeated. "My father," he said quietly, "kept journals. I've been reading them. He wrote about your grandfather, about the partnership. He knew what his father had done. He said it was the family's shame, but by then it was too late to fix it. Or so he told himself." He looked at me directly. "Your grandfather was brilliant. My grandfather wrote about him, about his ideas for the properties. The art district concept, that was Chen Wei-lin's vision. He saw that artists would one day transform this neighborhood." I felt tears in my eyes. My grandfather, the one I'd been told was just a simple restaurant worker, had envisioned the very neighborhood where I'd chosen to live and create art. "I'll agree to your terms," Hartley said suddenly. "Full partnership restoration. 50% of all 15 buildings, plus a settlement for the decades of lost income." His lawyers looked shocked, but he held up a hand. "It's the right thing to do." Finally. The paperwork took weeks to finalize. There were deeds to transfer, accounts to establish, settlements to calculate. The final amount was staggering, enough to ensure my family would never struggle again. But more than the money, it was the vindication that mattered. My father flew in from California for the final signing. He'd brought my grandfather's journal, the one he'd never translated. Victoria had hired a translator, and we'd finally read his words. Page after page of dreams and plans, ideas for the buildings, for the community he wanted to create, and throughout, mentions of his family, his hopes for his children and grandchildren. One entry particularly stood out. "I hope my descendants will understand that wealth is not just money. It is vision, courage, the willingness to see beauty where others see nothing. I hope they will be artists of life, creating something beautiful from whatever materials they are given. He would have loved your paintings, my father said to me after reading it. I was wrong, Lily. You didn't disappoint him. You became exactly what he hoped for. The day the paperwork was finalized, I stood in front of the building I'd almost been evicted from. My building now. Well, half mine, half the Hartley estates, but mine nonetheless. Richard Hartley stood next to me, looking uncomfortable. I owe you an apology, he said. Not just for the eviction, but for everything. The way I've treated tenants, the way I've run these buildings. Your grandfather's vision was for an artist community, wasn't it? I nodded. According to his journal, yes. Affordable spaces for creators, musicians, writers, people who make the world beautiful. Then that's what we'll do, he said. If you'll agree to it, we'll restore his vision. It took me a moment to respond, to process that he was genuinely asking for my partnership. Why? I finally asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm tired of being the villain in my own story. Because your courage in standing up to me made me realize I've become someone my own grandfather would be ashamed of, even with his faults. And because it's the right thing to do. Over the following months, everything changed. Victoria and I grew closer than we'd ever been, working together to establish the Chen Hartley Artist Foundation. We converted 3 of the buildings into affordable artist housing and studios. The rent from the commercial properties funded grants for emerging artists. My parents moved back to the city, finally able to retire comfortably. My father spent his days translating more of my grandfather's journals, discovering a man none of us had really known. My mother started taking art classes, something she'd always wanted to do but never had the time or money for. Richard Hartley, surprisingly, became an ally. He threw himself into the foundation work with the same intensity he'd once applied to maximizing profits. It's redemption, he told me once, for my family and myself. Victoria left her corporate law firm to run the foundation full-time. I finally found something I love, she told me. Helping artists, preserving grandfather's legacy. This is what I was meant to do. As for me, I kept painting, but now, instead of painting from desperation, I painted from joy. My work began selling, not because I was the girl who'd discovered the stolen legacy, though that certainly didn't hurt, but because something had freed itself in me. The weight of feeling like a disappointment was gone, replaced with the knowledge that I was exactly who I was meant to be. 1 year after that eviction notice, I held my first solo exhibition in the gallery we'd opened on the ground floor of my building. The showing was called Inherited Dreams, and it featured paintings inspired by my grandfather's story, by the photographs I'd found, by the journey of discovery that had changed everything. My parents were there, proud and tearful. Victoria stood by my side, introducing me to collectors with genuine enthusiasm. Even Richard Hartley came, purchasing the largest piece, a painting of our grandfathers shaking hands, but reimagined with the cityscape they'd helped create glowing behind them. This should hang in the foundation office, he said, to remind us of what partnership really means. The exhibition was a success beyond my wildest dreams, but the moment that mattered most came at the end of the night, when an elderly Chinese woman approached me. She was elegantly dressed, but walked with a cane, her movements careful but dignified. "You don't know me," she said in accented English, "but I knew your grandfather. We were neighbors in Chinatown before he bought the buildings." My heart raced. "You knew him?" She smiled. "He was a dreamer, always talking about creating spaces for beauty, for art. He said that buildings were just brick and mortar unless they held dreams." She looked around the gallery. "He would be so proud to see this. To see you." She pressed something into my hand, a small, worn photograph I hadn't seen before. It showed my grandfather standing in front of one of the buildings, but he wasn't alone. A young woman stood beside him, and in her arms was a baby. "That's your grandmother and your father," the woman said. The day your grandfather signed the partnership papers. He said he was building a future for them, for children he hadn't even met yet. She patted my hand. He built it for you, dear. It just took a while to find its way home. After she left, I stood in my gallery, surrounded by my art, in the building my grandfather had envisioned, and I understood something profound. We inherit more than money or property from those who come before us. We inherit dreams, courage, the audacity to envision something better. But sometimes those inheritances get lost, buried under years of struggle and survival. Finding them again doesn't just change our circumstances, it changes our understanding of who we are and where we come from. My grandfather wasn't just a hard-working immigrant who died too young. He was a visionary, a risk-taker, an artist in his own way, painting possibilities on the canvas of a city. The eviction notice that had once seemed like the end of everything had become the beginning of discovering who I really was. Not the family disappointment, not the failed lawyer, not the struggling artist, barely making rent. I was Chen Wei-lin's granddaughter, heir to more than buildings, heir to a legacy of seeing beauty where others saw nothing, of creating communities where art could flourish, of trusting in vision even when the world said to be practical. 3 years have passed since that day I found the box in my closet. The art district has been transformed, returning to my grandfather's original vision. Where once there were overpriced studios pushing out artists, there are now affordable spaces where creativity thrives. The Chen Hartley Foundation has helped launch dozens of careers, providing not just space, but mentorship, community, connection. Victoria and I have become not just sisters, but best friends and business partners. She handles the legal and financial aspects of the foundation, while I oversee the artistic programming. We joke that it only took discovering we were secret millionaires to finally get along, but the truth is deeper. We learned to see each other clearly, to appreciate our different strengths instead of comparing them. My parents have become fixtures in the art district, my mother teaching free art classes to children in the community center we opened, my father giving lectures on the history of Chinese immigrants in the city, always ending with his father's story. He achieved the American dream, he says, but not in the way we thought. His dream was bigger than just success. It was about creating something lasting, something beautiful. Richard Hartley and I have developed an unexpected friendship. He's still awkward and formal, but he's trying to be better, to honor both our grandfather's original partnership. Last month, he brought me a box of his grandfather's journals. "I thought you should see these," he said, "the parts about your grandfather. There's remorse there, especially in the later years. He knew what he'd done was wrong." Reading Thomas Hartley's words about my grandfather was bittersweet. The betrayal was clear, justified as business necessity, but so was the regret. Chen was the visionary, he'd written. I merely had the connections. Without him, these buildings are just property. With him, they could have been something special. Now, they are something special. The gallery on the ground floor showcases emerging artists from all backgrounds. The studios above house painters, sculptors, musicians, writers, all creating, all contributing to the vibrant community my grandfather had imagined. The rent they pay is fair, sustainable, allowing them to focus on their art without the crushing fear of eviction I once knew. I still live in the same small apartment where I found the box, though I could afford something much larger now. But this space holds meaning. It's where I discovered who I really was, where my grandfather's past found me. I've turned it into a proper studio, with good lighting and space to work on large canvases. The walls are covered with photos, the ones I found, new ones of the thriving art community, and pictures of my family, finally whole and proud. My art has evolved too. I no longer paint from a place of desperation or the need to prove something. I paint stories, my grandfather's story, the stories of immigrants who built this city, the stories of artists who struggle and triumph. My latest series, Inherited Dreams, is being shown at the City Museum, a validation I never imagined possible. But the greatest validation comes in smaller moments, when a young artist tells me that the affordable studio space saved their career, when a child in my mother's art class creates something beautiful and discovers they have talent, when I see my father's pride as he shares his father's true story, when Victoria calls me late at night, excited about a new program she's developing for the foundation. Last week, I received a letter from a young woman facing eviction from one of the buildings we don't own. She'd heard our story and was asking for help. Victoria and I met with her, reviewed her case, and found that her landlord was violating several tenant protection laws. We're representing her pro bono, fighting for her right to stay in her home. This is what grandfather would have wanted, Victoria said as we prepared the case. Not just for us to benefit from his legacy, but to use it to help others. She was right. The true inheritance wasn't the buildings or the money. It was the responsibility to see potential where others see problems, to create beauty and community where others see only profit, to stand up for those who, like I once was, are struggling to hold on to their dreams. Sometimes I stand in front of that building where it all started, where my grandfather and Thomas Hartley once shook hands with such hope for the future. The photo of that moment hangs in our foundation office, a reminder of both betrayal and redemption, of how the past can be reclaimed and transformed. I think about the girl I was 3 years ago, crying over an eviction notice, feeling like a failure, not knowing that my grandfather's legacy was literally surrounding me, waiting to be discovered. I wish I could tell her that everything would be okay, that the very thing that seemed like an ending would become the most extraordinary beginning. But maybe not knowing was part of the journey. Maybe I needed to be at my lowest point to find the strength to stand up to Richard Hartley, to discover that my worth wasn't determined by my family's expectations or my bank account, but by my willingness to fight for what was right, to honor my grandfather's true legacy. The Chen Hartley Artist Foundation now manages all 15 buildings, providing affordable housing and studios to over 200 artists. We've expanded beyond just visual arts to include musicians, dancers, writers, and performers of all kinds. The waiting list is long, but we're working on acquiring more properties, spreading my grandfather's vision throughout the city. Every application we receive tells a story of struggle and determination, of artists trying to survive in a world that often doesn't value what they create. I read everyone personally, seeing myself in their words, remembering the desperation of facing eviction, the fear that my dreams were too impractical to survive. But dreams, I've learned, are like seeds. They can lie dormant for decades, waiting for the right moment to grow. My grandfather planted seeds in 1952 that didn't fully bloom until I found that box in my closet 70 years later. The artists we support are planting seeds too, creating works that might not be fully appreciated for years, decades even, but that add beauty and meaning to the world nonetheless. Richard Hartley asked me once if I forgave his family for what they'd done. It was a complicated question. The betrayal had caused real harm, my grandmother's poverty, my father's struggles, the years of feeling like we weren't enough. But holding on to anger wouldn't honor my grandfather's memory. He was a man of vision, not vengeance. I think, I told him, that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about transforming it into something better. Your grandfather's betrayal led to this moment, to us working together to create what they originally envisioned. Maybe that's its own kind of justice. He nodded, understanding. We're not friends exactly, but we're partners, united in the work of redemption and creation. The art district has become a destination now, written about in travel guides and lifestyle magazines. The neighborhood where art lives, one article called it. They tell the story of the Chinese immigrant and his vision, the betrayal and rediscovery, the granddaughter who fought for her inheritance and transformed it into something greater than personal wealth. But for me, it's simpler than that. It's about waking up every morning in the apartment where I once faced eviction and now feeling at home. It's about painting without fear, knowing that my work has value beyond its commercial worth. It's about my family, finally whole and proud, understanding that success comes in many forms. My mother started painting last year, at age 65. Her work is naive but full of joy, colors that sing with the freedom of someone finally doing what they love. She has a small exhibition next month in our community gallery. My father wrote the artist statement for her, his words full of pride and love. "Art is in our blood," he wrote. "It just took us a while to realize it." Victoria is getting married next spring to another lawyer she met through the foundation work, someone who shares her passion for justice and community building. She asked me to paint something for their wedding, something that captures our family's journey, she said. "I'm working on it now, a large canvas that tells our story in abstract forms and colors, the darkness of struggle giving way to the light of discovery, the scattered pieces of our past coming together to form something beautiful and whole." At the center is a pair of hands shaking, but they're not just our grandfather's hands. They're all of ours, reaching across time and betrayal to clasp in partnership and hope. The painting isn't finished yet, but I know how it ends. With light, with color, with the promise that every ending is also a beginning, that every eviction notice might be hiding an invitation to discover who we really are. Sometimes tourists come to the gallery specifically to meet me, the woman who discovered the hidden legacy. They want to hear the story firsthand, to understand how it felt to go from facing eviction to owning the building. I tell them the truth, that it felt surreal, impossible, like a dream I was afraid to wake from. But I also tell them that the real transformation wasn't financial. It was the discovery that I had always been enough, that my grandfather's legacy lived in me, not through property or wealth, but through the courage to see beauty where others saw failure, to persist when everything seemed lost, to trust in the value of what I created, even when the world said it wasn't practical. "Your story gives me hope," a young artist told me recently. She was living in one of our studios, working 3 jobs to support her sculpture practice. "It reminds me that things can change, that struggling doesn't mean failing." I told her what I've learned to be true, that every artist's struggle is valid and valuable, that creating beauty in a world that often prioritizes profit is its own form of courage, that somewhere, in ways we might not yet understand, we're all building legacies for people we'll never meet. My grandfather never met me, but he built something that would one day save me. Not just financially, but spiritually. He gave me roots I didn't know I had, a history of vision and courage that helped me understand my own choices weren't betrayals of family expectation, but continuations of family legacy. The eviction notice still sits in my desk drawer, kept as a reminder. Not of how close I came to losing everything, but of how loss can become discovery, how the worst day of your life might be the beginning of understanding who you really are. When I look at it now, I don't see failure. I see the universe's strange way of guiding me to my inheritance, not just the buildings, but the knowledge that I come from dreamers and builders, from people who saw potential in empty spaces and had the courage to invest in beauty. That's the real story, the one that matters more than property disputes and legal battles. It's the story of how we inherit more than we know, how the past reaches forward to catch us when we're falling, how our ancestors' dreams can become our salvation if we're brave enough to claim them. Every painting I create now carries a piece of this story, this understanding that art isn't separate from life but woven through it, giving meaning to struggle and beauty to survival. The gallery visitors might come for the story of the girl who discovered she was an heiress, but they leave with something more, the reminder that we all carry hidden inheritances, waiting to be discovered in our moments of greatest need. The district continues to thrive, new artists arriving monthly, drawn by the promise of affordable space and supportive community. We've started a mentorship program, pairing established artists with newcomers, creating the kind of support system I wish I'd had during my struggling years. Richard Hartley has become one of our biggest supporters, not just financially, but personally. He attends every opening, purchases pieces from emerging artists, and has even started taking pottery classes. I'm terrible at it, he admitted, showing me a lopsided bowl he'd made. "But there's something therapeutic about creating something with your hands, something that didn't exist before you touched it." I understood. It's what I feel every time I face a blank canvas. The possibility, the potential, the chance to make something beautiful from nothing. The foundation has expanded beyond our original buildings. Other property owners, inspired by our model, have partnered with us to create affordable artist housing throughout the city. My grandfather's vision, betrayed and buried for 70 years, has finally taken root and spread. But the most meaningful growth has been personal. My family, once fractured by disappointment and misunderstanding, has healed. We gather every Sunday now for dinner, not in judgment, but in celebration. My parents speak of my grandfather with new understanding, seeing him not as the simple immigrant they thought they knew, but as the complex, visionary man he really was. "He would be so proud," my mother says often, usually while watching me paint or attending one of the community events we host. "Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become, who I've become." It's strange to think that I'm the same person who once sat on that threadbare couch, surrounded by bills, feeling like a failure. But I'm also completely different. The discovery of my grandfather's legacy didn't just change my circumstances, it changed my understanding of myself, my place in the world, my right to pursue beauty even when it seems impractical. I think about the previous tenant sometimes, the one who left so quickly they forgot the box in the closet. Were they also an artist, struggling to make rent? Did they ever know what they left behind? I've tried to track them down, to thank them for inadvertently preserving my grandfather's legacy, but they vanished into the city's anonymous churn. Maybe that's fitting. Maybe some gifts are meant to be given unknowingly, some discoveries meant to feel like destiny rather than chance. The box itself sits in our foundation office now, displayed in a glass case with a placard telling its story. Visitors often stand before it for long moments, perhaps thinking about their own closets, their own hidden boxes, the inheritances they might not yet know they're carrying. "It makes me want to go through my grandmother's things," one woman told me, "to look more carefully at the stories I thought I knew." That's the power of discovery. It reminds us that the past isn't fixed, that family stories can be rewritten with new information, that understanding can come even decades after loss. Last month, we received a donation from an unexpected source, the Hartley Family Trust, with a note from Richard's elderly mother, whom I'd never met. "My father-in-law's betrayal was our family's shame," she wrote. "This can't undo the past, but perhaps it can help build the future your grandfather envisioned." The donation was substantial, enough to fund operations for a year. But more than the money, it was the acknowledgement that mattered, the recognition that wrongs could be admitted, if not fully righted. I used to think my story was about justice, about reclaiming what was stolen. But I've come to understand it's really about transformation, how betrayal can become partnership, how loss can become discovery, how a granddaughter's eviction notice can become the key to understanding her grandfather's true legacy. The paintings I create now reflect this understanding. They're not just about beauty, but about the complex layers of history and family, about how the past and present interweave, about how we carry our ancestors' dreams, whether we know it or not. My latest series explores the concept of inherited dreams, not just in my family, but in all families. I've been collecting stories from other artists in our community, learning about their own family histories, the dreams that were passed down or lost, the talents that skipped generations only to re-emerge. One painter told me about her great-grandmother, a master weaver whose work was never valued because she was a woman. Another shared how his grandfather had been a musician in Korea, but gave it up when he immigrated, considering art too risky in a new country. These stories, these buried dreams, inform my new work. "You're painting our collective history," Victoria said when she saw the pieces. "The dreams that got deferred but never died." She's right. That's what I'm trying to capture, the persistence of beauty, the way creativity finds a way even through generations of struggle and practical choices. The series will be exhibited next month, not just in our gallery, but in a major museum downtown. It's a recognition I couldn't have imagined when I was facing eviction, when my paintings were stacked unsold at weekend markets. But success, I've learned, isn't just about recognition or financial stability. It's about alignment. When who you are matches what you do, when your work reflects not just your individual vision, but your place in a larger story. I am Chen Wei Lin's granddaughter. I am an artist. I am a keeper of dreams, both my own and those that were almost lost. These aren't separate identities, but one integrated whole, each part strengthening the others. The eviction notice that once represented my failure has become the symbol of my transformation. I've had it framed now, hung in my studio where I can see it while I paint. It reminds me that sometimes the worst moments are actually doorways, that rock bottom can be solid ground to build on, that inheritance isn't always obvious or immediate. Students from the local art school come to tour our facilities regularly. They're young, eager, full of dreams and worries in equal measure. They ask me for advice, for the secret to making it as an artist. There's no secret, I tell them, only persistence and the courage to value what you create even when the world doesn't yet see its worth. And remember, you carry more resources than you know. Your history, your family's stories, even their struggles, these are all materials for your art. One student, a young woman who reminded me of myself at that age, stayed after a recent tour. "My parents want me to quit art school," she said. "They say it's not practical, that I'll end up homeless." I thought about my own parents, their fears and disappointments, their inability to see that I was continuing rather than betraying our family legacy. "Practical isn't always what it seems," I told her. My grandfather seemed practical, working in restaurants, saving money. But he was actually a dreamer, investing in art spaces when no one else saw their value. Sometimes the most practical thing is to trust your vision. She left, looking thoughtful, and I hoped she'd find her own way to balance family expectations with personal truth. The work continues. Every day brings new challenges. Artists who need help, buildings that need repair, the constant balance between financial sustainability and our mission to provide affordable space. But it's meaningful work, connected to something larger than myself. Richard Hartley and I meet weekly now to discuss foundation business. Our relationship has evolved from adversaries to partners to something approaching friendship. He's even started collecting art seriously, not as investment, but because he's learned to see what my grandfather saw, that beauty has its own value. "Your grandfather was right," he told me recently. "Buildings are just brick and mortar without dreams to fill them." We were standing in one of the studios, watching an artist work on a massive mural. The artist, a refugee from Syria, was painting his journey. Loss and displacement transformed into a vision of hope and new beginnings. "This is what they envisioned," Richard continued. "Your grandfather and mine, before it all went wrong. This kind of community, this kind of creation." "It took 70 years, I said, "but we got here." "You got us here," he corrected, "by refusing to leave, by fighting for what was right." But I knew it wasn't just me. It was my grandfather's spirit, somehow preserved in that hidden box. It was Victoria's legal expertise and newfound passion. It was my parents' eventual understanding and support. It was even Richard's willingness to confront his family's past and choose redemption. The mural artist stepped back to examine his work, and we all stood in silence, taking in the power of transformation made visible. This is what art does. It takes our struggles and traumas and transforms them into something that speaks to universal human experience. As I write this, sitting in the same apartment where I once faced eviction, I can hear music from the studio above. A violinist practicing, the notes floating through the old building's bones. Outside, the art district thrums with creative energy, galleries and studios and cafes, all contributing to the vision my grandfather had so long ago. Tomorrow, I'll paint. I'll stand before a canvas and continue the work of transformation, turning experience into art, struggle into beauty. It's what I was meant to do. What I was always meant to do, even when I couldn't see it. The eviction notice changed everything, but not in the way Richard Hartley intended. Instead of ending my story, it began it. Instead of forcing me out, it revealed that I had always belonged here, in these buildings my grandfather envisioned, in this community of dreamers and creators. I think about the people who will come after us, the artists not yet born who will one day work in these studios. What hidden legacies will they discover? What transformations will they undergo? What beauty will they add to the world? These are the questions that drive me now, that inform my work both as an artist and as a steward of my grandfather's vision. We are all links in a chain of dreams, each generation building on the last, sometimes consciously, sometimes through discoveries that come like gifts from the past. My story, our story, is proof that inheritance isn't always immediate or obvious. Sometimes it takes generations for a legacy to find its way home. Sometimes it takes an eviction notice to discover you were always meant to stay. The Chen Hartley Artist Foundation continues to grow, but more importantly, it continues to serve its purpose, providing space for beauty in a world that often prioritizes profit, offering stability to artists so they can focus on creation, building community where isolation might otherwise flourish. And in the center of it all, in the building where it all began, I paint. I paint my grandfather's dreams and my own. I paint the stories of struggle and triumph. I paint the transformation that's possible when we discover who we really are and where we really come from. The eviction notice sits framed on my wall, no longer a symbol of failure but of beginning. Every time I look at it, I remember the girl who thought she had lost everything, not knowing she was about to discover more than she ever imagined possible. That girl, that version of me, deserved compassion even in her struggle. She deserved to know that her choices weren't wrong, that her pursuit of art wasn't impractical, that she carried within her a legacy of vision and courage, even if she couldn't see it yet. Now, when young artists come to me in despair, facing their own eviction notices or family disappointments, I can offer more than just sympathy. I can offer the truth that transformation is possible, that the worst moments might be preparing us for discoveries we can't yet imagine, that we carry more strength and resources than we know. Your grandfather would be so proud, my mother tells me regularly now. And finally, I believe her. Not because I became wealthy or successful in conventional terms, but because I continued his true work, seeing beauty where others saw nothing, creating community where others saw only commerce, persisting in the face of apparent impossibility. This is my inheritance, my true inheritance. Not just buildings or money, but the courage to dream and the determination to make those dreams real. It's an inheritance that can't be stolen or lost, only forgotten and rediscovered. And so I paint, and I provide space for others to create, and I honor my grandfather's memory not through sentiment, but through action. Every canvas is a conversation with him across time. Every artist we support is a continuation of his vision. Every day that the art district thrives is proof that dreams, even when buried for 70 years, never really die. The story that began with an eviction notice has become something so much larger, a story about family and legacy, about justice and redemption, about the power of art to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. It's a story that's still being written, with each new artist who finds shelter in our buildings, each new creation that emerges from our studios, each new discovery of hidden strength and unexpected inheritance. This is what I've learned. We are all heirs to more than we know. The challenge isn't in the inheritance itself, but in discovering it, claiming it, and transforming it into something that serves not just ourselves, but the larger dream of beauty and community and human connection. My grandfather, Chen Wei-lin, came to this country with nothing but dreams. Those dreams were stolen, buried, almost lost. But dreams, like seeds, can survive decades underground, waiting for the right moment to grow. That moment came with an eviction notice, a hidden box, and a granddaughter who refused to leave. Now, his dreams live again, not just in buildings, but in the lives and art of hundreds of creators. His vision has become reality, his legacy reclaimed and transformed. And somewhere, I believe, he knows. Somewhere, he sees what his sacrifice and vision ultimately created, even if it took a path he never could have imagined. This is my story. This is our story. This is the story of how an eviction notice became an invitation to discover who I really was, where I really came from, and what I was really meant to do. And it's not over. Every day brings new possibilities, new artists to support, new beauty to create. The foundation my grandfather laid, even though it was hidden for so long, is solid. We build on it now, all of us. The artists, the dreamers, the ones who refuse to believe that practical and beautiful are mutually exclusive. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story moved you, and if you believe that everyone deserves to have their true worth seen, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Comment below and tell me, what was the moment in the story that resonated with you the most? And if you want more powerful stories about finding your strength and overcoming the odds, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next.